Hey guys, welcome to the wild side in a not so wild setting, and that's because I'm here with my brother where he lives to talk about history, as I have said we might do. Now my brother, looking back in our life when we were little kids, he's the one that got me into the Old West. My life when I was little is like that joke. If I had a nickel for every time I didn't know what was going on, I'd be like, hey, where's all these nickels coming from? Because when I was a kid, I had no idea what was going on. He's about a year and a half older than me, and somehow he did know. So like when we would travel cross country to Missouri with my mom and my sister, my dad would stay home, we'd be going through all these Old West places, and my brother was constantly thinking about riding horses and all that kind of stuff, and I'm just looking on the map for the next town to arrive, I'm ashamed to say. And when we went to Deadwood, Deadwood has a special place in our hearts because we got to see it before it became one big casino. And he was into cowboy stuff, and I just followed him around. And eventually later, when I was like 13, 14, I developed my own love and passion for it. And I went off on a different direction of wanting to live it and wanting to reenact it, as you all know by my old videos, and he went more the direction of studying it. He also got me into Dances with Wolves. I had no idea what that was. He loved that movie, and then we both watched Tombstone together, and then I, and a few of our friends, we went down to Tombstone that October to celebrate, even though we missed the celebration weekend because the truck broke down, but we did make it to Tombstone. We had a great time. So anyway, that's a little bit of our past and who my brother is. He studied things like Billy the Kid, I think was one of your first ones, because Young Guns came out before Tombstone. And then when Tombstone came out, he got deep into study with that, which I'll talk about that later. Like when we went to Tombstone, he went to locations that he found in the book. Like I remember that morning that he woke me up, or I think I was awake. I'm a morning person. Or maybe it was 2 a.m. Anyway, he showed me the book and saying, I think that we're in the location that the photographer might have been.
Yeah, and the book was the Time Life series on the Old West, and I don't remember who took the picture, but it was a picture taken about 1881 of Tombstone overlooking from up on the hills with the mines. Yeah,
so that's the kind of thing that he was thinking about. And I just was surprised out of nowhere that he came up with that stuff, because I just thought I had no idea how he even knew where to go. And because he drove that night, found us a parking spot. We froze our buns off, all of us. We slept out on the ground. It was a real desperado experience. Remember that? Mm-hmm. We also did a watch thing where we all took turns keeping watch. And for some reason, we all just do whatever my brother says. He was like, we're going to keep watch. So all 5 of us took a 2-hour shift or something like that, and kept watch over the night. It was cool. It was an excellent experience. Freezing, we were hungry, and it was so cool.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. So anyway, fortunately we've got my brother here now. If this goes well and y'all enjoy it, then we're talking about how it would be cool to follow up with a live video. So we'll talk about that later, and that depends on you guys if you take this in and enjoy it and have questions. Otherwise, I guess we'll just share it with the kids that we never have.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. One thing I'll clarify. Richard did take off more into the living it, while I got more into the study. But just to qualify that, actually, from the time I was 18 to about 23, I did a lot of. I first started out traveling.
Before he got fat.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a motorcycle, and for my 21st birthday, for example, I rode to. From Seattle to Fort Sumner because I wanted to go on my 21st birthday where Billy the Kid died, and I went there and saw a bunch of sights and a lot of interesting, really neat things. And so I did a lot of that, but then I got so into the study and just kind of settled down. And then when I settled down and started studying, Richard kind of started getting more out there and really living it while I have my nose in the books lately. I still get out, but not as much as Richard does, not by any means.
Yeah, his New Mexico trip is a story in itself. He found some cool locations. Because again, my brother studies in depth. He maps out everything where Billy the Kid might have gone. And this was in the days before the internet.
Yeah, long before.
So it's pretty cool. we won't go into it today, but he probably found some locations that other people aren't aware of. So anyway, that's a whole nother story. Today we're going to talk Tombstone, Wyatt Earp.
Yeah, it sounds good.
And as I mentioned in the live video that got taken down, I think it was in the one that was taken down, unfortunately. When you study in depth, so you read up everything you can on Wyatt Earp, because that's your main point of interest, well then you start going out into the peripherals more and more. And so that's what always impresses me, is he knows, you know, you go into reading about who wrote about Wyatt Earp and who met him and what did they say about it and all of that. So that's the kind of stuff we're going to get into. I think you're ready to just rock and roll.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so well, and one thing I want to clarify, because these issues can be sensitive. A lot of people kind of, well, to borrow a word from Bill O'Reilly, bloviate a bit and maybe talk a little bit outside themselves a little too far. And so, for example, Richard says found some locations that other people don't know about. To clarify, at the time weren't as well known, because now with the proliferation of the internet, a lot of information's out there. But there was things at the time that were not common knowledge, and still might not be real common knowledge. But so those are the kind of things picked up on. But also want to always have intellectual honesty and not try to say that I know more than everybody else, but just that the information we try to really go deep and verify. And the other thing I definitely try to caution myself with and others is be very hesitant to come to absolute conclusions. You know, I mean, you can have strong opinions, and you know, for the research that you do, myself or others, you're trying to come to a conclusion, and so there's nothing wrong with having perceptions and feelings about things and have a good defense for why you feel that. But at the same time, it's got to be delicately balanced against being dogmatic about a conclusion, where we try to impose a conclusion that just doesn't have the details there, where the premises don't necessarily support the conclusion, not because the premises are dishonest, but because they're not fully cogent and we don't have everything that we need for that conclusion. And that's something that's really important to me, is that always being confident, being humble in our research. So yeah, just want to clarify that.
That's something he and I talk about quite a bit. It's like the same attitude you see on Facebook about, well, politics. 'Tis the season. I mean, you see that everywhere, you know, with history and everything. People coming quick to conclusions because they heard some guy say it and they like how he said it.
Yeah, running into that a lot in the Old West, especially with Wyatt Earp, I think more than anybody. Of all the Old West gunfighters, Wyatt Earp is the most deeply researched and debated. Billy the Kid's probably second, I'm sure. But I mean, there's so many books, so many questions, and so many opinions on Wyatt Earp that it can sometimes get a little bit out of control. So some of the examples, you know, the Buntline Special, that debate. Who killed Johnny Ringo is one. Did Wyatt Earp arrest, or I shouldn't say arrest, did he protect, I want to say Billy Claiborne, not Billy Claiborne, the other guy. The one who was brought up from Charleston, and I'm drawing a blank on the name right now, I do that a lot. But anyways, there's these questions, and people will get, you know, again, sorry, dogs are walking. You guys, can you sit down? Can you sit down?
It's not rain.
Yeah, like clacking and clacking along. Okay. So anyway, you know, people get some really diehard conclusions about these things, and you just got to stay open to them if you really want to be honest with the evidence. And I think the Buntline Special, I think who killed Johnny Ringo, and also the question of did Wyatt Earp arrest Ben Thompson and Ellsworth or not. I think those are the three where people just really come to conclusions that aren't I should say absolute conclusions that aren't justified.
I'll throw in another one.
Sure.
And you correct me if I'm wrong, but the one about whether Earp was a braggadocious blowhard.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think that's as hotly debated. I think it's a good thing
Maybe it
to bring
should
up. Well, I think that it's just something that people say without full knowledge. You know, none of the claims of Wyatt Earp being braggadocious came up until, I think, pretty much Frank Waters. There was others who didn't like him. Some of the McLeod Rain, I think was his name. I should probably have this all written down in front of me so I don't confuse the names. But there were anti-Earp historians because they were friends with the cowboy crowd in Tombstone, and so they got bad stories. But Waters really took it to another level and started talking about what a blusterer Wyatt Earp was. Frank Waters, who wrote Wyatt Earp's biography and completely changed it. She was so angry with it that she threatened him. Said if she could do stuff to him, she would have, because she was so upset with the biography that he wrote for her, and twisted a lot of her words. And the original notes from those interviews that he did compared to the final manuscript or the released book are just totally different, you know. And
so those original notes exist?
Yeah.
Wow.
And but anyways, and that's where a lot of the stuff about Wyatt Earp becoming a braggadocio comes from. He was actually notoriously tight-lipped, and all of his allies, all his friends, anybody who interviewed him will tell you that. But not only that, what's significant is that none of his opponents, no one who disliked him in his lifetime, ever said that he was a braggadocious person. You might think of Billy Breckenridge, who was played by Jason Priestley in the movie. The real Billy Breckenridge was in communication with Wyatt Earp right up until the time Wyatt died. Actually stabbed him in the back just before his death. Really hurt Wyatt pretty bad. But none of these people claimed that Wyatt Earp was a braggart, or that he blustered and talked. So if that were true, if it were true that he was, then someone somewhere along the way would say that he did. But that didn't come up until years later, when people started kind of making their own conclusions on stuff. And in fact, one guy, it might be William McLeod Rain, I think it was, said about Earp that one thing you could say about Earp, and he did not like Earp, he was anti-Earper in terms of the Cowboys, and one thing he said about Earp was, he said, lying is a coward's device, and Wyatt Earp was no coward. And so he said that, saying that Wyatt didn't lie. Everyone thinks that Wyatt lied. What you really had more of a case of with Wyatt was that he actually downplayed everything he did. And so people would ask him stuff, and he'd just be like, oh, yeah, we went over there and did our job. That's all it was. And so then when he wanted to sell his story, he had a hard time believing that his story was worthwhile. He was very quiet, very reserved. Whether you want to say he was humble or not, I guess that's up to debate. But he didn't think that he had a story really worth selling. And I do want to reference, a lot of these comments come from Gary Roberts. And there's not very many people who are more of an expert on Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday than Gary Roberts. He is definitely up there on in the pantheon of people who know what they're talking about. He wrote the Doc Holliday biography, the best one, that came out about 20 years ago. If you watch History Channel, anything about Wyatt or Doc, he's probably interviewed. And a lot of these sentiments come from him. But anyways, he points out, what's that?
Which sentiments?
These sentiments about Wyatt being, what I'm saying about Wyatt not being braggadocious, and the fact that he didn't think that his life and career were really worth celebrating. So I think where a lot of the braggadocious stuff, or where you debate was he lying or not, was that a lot of his stories came from the truth, but he actually, in sort of a weird twist of humility, thought these stories aren't going to sell, they're not good enough, let's add a little spice to them. And now we don't know how much spice, maybe very little, maybe a lot. He left a lot of stuff out, and that's one of the arguments. If he was really so blustery, why did he not talk about these different things that happened? And to him, they just weren't that big a deal. That was just him doing his job. But if he was really blustery, he would have played all that stuff up. But when he talked to his first biographer, John Flood, and then his second biographer, Stuart Lake, he realized that if he was going to sell his story, it had to be exciting and interesting. So, to borrow directly from Dr. Gary Roberts, I actually don't remember where I was going with that thought, but because Richard wanted to say something. So
yeah, I was going to interject with one example that I know of. I don't know many of these, but mostly it comes from talking to you. But I remember in the movie, after when the Cowboys were doing their revenge, on the rainy night when Earp pushed away the girl for her own safety. Remember when they shot Morgan?
Yeah.
That I think it was that situation. Correct me if I'm wrong or whatever. You'll tell me. But I think it was one of those shootings where Wyatt got shot at, but somebody said no, he wasn't getting shot at. He just liked to draw attention to himself. by claiming, oh, they were shooting at me because some cowboys rode by and shot at the building.
Oh, okay, yeah, two different incidences there.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Morgan Earp incident, they shot at Wyatt and at Morgan. Morgan was shooting pool. Wyatt was sitting, so there was the front entrance and the back entrance. The back entrance had two doors that came in from the alleyway. Wyatt was sitting like I'm sitting with the back doors over this way. And one person in one door shot at Morgan, hit him in the back. The other person shot at Wyatt, hit about 8 inches over his head in the wall. So he was actually shot at there. They were trying to take out all the Earps. They'd already tried on Virgil, obviously, as it showed in the movie. And the shooting of Virgil and the shooting of Morgan were about 3 months apart.
And the movie depicted them pretty accurately, except that they weren't on the same night.
Yeah, fairly, yeah, pretty darn accurate. Just, they're condensing for time, of course, because it's a 2-hour movie. The other incident was George Hoyt over in Dodge City. And Wyatt said that they had a contract out on him. And some people, so he said that the guy was shooting at him. Somebody said that, I don't know, some people claim that he wasn't being shot at, that it was just random and Wyatt just happened to be outside. One of the main arguments for that he wasn't being shot at was that Bat said that he didn't think George Hoyt knew that Wyatt was standing there when he fired. However, we have to look at this logically. Even if he knew, like, is it possible for him to be shooting at Wyatt if he didn't know that Wyatt was there? Yeah, because if he thought Wyatt was inside, he might have thought that Wyatt was in the building. He just wanted to, because they did spray scatter shots, now and then.
Drive-bys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was drive-bys. They would do that kind of thing. And but Wyatt's claim was that the I don't want to say ranchers, I guess you could say ranchers, the cowboys, whatever, the ranch drivers or whatever, the range drivers had it out for him. And that's very, very likely for sure, because they didn't like him. Wyatt definitely had a reputation in the cow camps. So it could be very well that Earp was being honest and he believed they were gunning for him. And it could be very honestly that George Hoyt didn't know he was out there, wasn't even shooting at Wyatt, was just shooting at the Dodge place, the Dodge house, trying to stir up trouble. So it could be both. They're not mutually exclusive. It could be that they were trying to shoot at Wyatt at various times, or they were after him, and the word was out. Now Wyatt claims that, I forget who it was, Wyatt claimed at one point that somebody told him that there was, the word out was to get Wyatt and to watch himself. So that comes from Wyatt himself. He didn't just make up the idea on the spot right there, but we don't know, there's no way to collaborate that. But again, without getting into all the details, I don't think that's something Wyatt would make up. Again, no one in his lifetime tried to contradict those things. All the contradictions came about 20 years after his life, with people trying to discredit him who were more aligned with the Cowboys. So you don't have to take him at his word. I choose to. It's not something I have enough details, enough information on. I think that just from what I've read on the Old West days or the Kansas days, he absolutely wasn't liked by a lot of the Cowboys and a lot of the ranch leaders from Texas, because he kept their boys in their place. So there definitely was dislike for Earp and plenty for them to go after him, but we can't know for sure on that.
So notice how he doesn't say it's definitely one or the other versus the guys who do.
Yeah.
That's what I appreciate about my brother. He shares, well, this is the angle from both sides, and it's inconclusive, but then even though he has an opinion on it, he doesn't say that's the way. And that's how you can tell a good historian from a bad historian. The bad ones just like to say, this is how it was.
Yeah, a lot of people, it's hard in life in general, and it applies to history research also. We like conclusions and we like absolutes. Anything that's not absolute, anything that we can't know, is a form of chaos. And chaos is hard to live in. And so it's really tough to do research, for us, historical research. It's hard to do that and not be able to come to a final conclusion. And that's why it's tough. And a lot of people do, unfortunately, they hardline an opinion, and to do that you have to totally ignore certain facts. But that's why I always encourage everyone, make an opinion and stand by it, but have your reasons and be open to the idea that something could be discovered tomorrow that totally turns your opinions up on its head.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. I think it's particularly an American trait. I think it's funny, the the attitude that helped us settle this land, pioneer this land, is also what makes us bad historians.
Yeah, probably true.
We like the macho-ness of saying, this is how it is.
Yeah, yeah, boy, yeah. There's a lot of Western myth that comes just from guys who want to go, yep, that's just how it was. And while that's fun and it makes for a good John Wayne movie, it makes for bad historical context a lot of times.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. What else you want to dive into?
Well, let's see. Good. Hopefully that sound wasn't too
I think
bad.
the wife's doing laundry. Sorry if it's making a noise.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, and one thing I want to address, kind of a pet peeve of mine, is I find and hear from a lot of people who want to comment on Wyatt Earp, and I don't know if they do this with Wild Bill. I haven't seen it so much with him. I have seen it some, not a ton with Wild Bill. Billy's a different kind of character, so it doesn't really apply. Maybe the same thing with the Doc because he wasn't known as a lawman. But it's the idea that a lot of people like to come up with these hard conclusions that Wyatt Earp was a scumbag, and they just can't stand him and all this terrible stuff about him. And usually those conclusions are just, people come to their own wild conclusions without enough facts, because, really it should be somewhere in the middle. But the point being that I don't understand why people study just to come to these conclusions. It's kind of like watching a movie just to nitpick it. If you watch a movie and you're not worried about the story is good or the performances are good, but you're going to talk about that the tires on the motorcycle and the off-road scene weren't right because you would never drive in grass on those kind of tires, so you hate the movie. You're just nitpicking that movie. You're not open to liking it. You're just trying to come up with something to say that sounds smarter than everybody else. Those kind of arguments. And I see that a lot with people with Wyatt Earp. They want to conclude what a scumbag he was, say things about him that are just, total hyperbole. And I think to myself, then why are you studying this? I don't study Wyatt Earp in the Old West because I think these guys were saints. None of them were. Wyatt Earp had a rough start to his career. I admire the fact that how he changed as he grew and how he strove for something more. But his life was rough. I read about these guys because they lived something that we don't get to experience. They lived a life that we'll never understand. And so I just find it incredibly sanctimonious to also pass judgment on them according to our standards. And not that there's not judgments we can't pass, we certainly can, but sometimes there's a lot of hubris that goes into it to declare that somebody was a scumbag because they did this or that. One example is the claim about Wyatt Earp leaving Maddie. And we don't know a lot about it, but there's some things that should be known. People just say, oh yeah, she was waiting for him in California with the family, and so he ran off and snuck off and hooked up with Josie. And that's kind of the popular view of that, but that's not totally true. Maddie was in California. Wyatt was getting ready to go back there and visit the family, and she left. She left before Wyatt came and before he went to go to San Francisco to see Sadie. So a lot of people say that he went to see Sadie. She found out, was heartbroken, and left, and complained about what a terrible guy Wyatt was. That's not true. She left and then Wyatt went. So now maybe he was already planning on going, but we can't read his mind, and so therefore we can't insist we know what his thoughts were. What we do know is that he did not go and hook up with Sadie before the relationship ended with Maddie. And we don't know why the relationship ended with Maddie, but one thing that goes to the whole thing about how we don't live in those times. It was extremely common back in those days for a man on the frontier, whether he was a lawman, whether he was a cowboy, whatever he was doing, to, if he was in that sporting fraternity, gamblers, to connect with the prostitute. That was about the only available women at the time. So they would connect with the prostitute and they would have a relationship as long as it was mutually advantageous. And that was understood. These relationships would come and go all the time. So you had lots of lawmen shacking up with prostitutes or looking out for them. The prostitute could gain from the lawman who could protect her. It didn't have to be a lawman, but anyone who was able to take care of her and protect her so that she could do her trade. And the lawman, gambler, cowboy, whatever, had a woman he could go to, and satisfy his urges. And one of them might say, well, I'm going to go to St. Louis, or I'm going to go to Omaha. The other one says, okay, I'm going to go to El Paso. And that relationship would end. They didn't usually follow along for a long time. Now, Maddie went with Wyatt from Kansas to Tombstone, so she might have had ideas that Wyatt wasn't entertaining, but they weren't married. And so it could be that Wyatt was a total turd to her. We don't know. But we can't insist that he was just because he ended up with Sadie later. He might have thought when he was in Kansas, I don't plan on this to be a long-term relationship. This is one of those where we look out for each other and then it's over, and she hung around longer. Maybe she decided, this isn't working. I'm going to Globe, and Wyatt was in Colorado, and she wrote him a letter, said, I'm not going to stick around. He said, all right, I'm going to see Sadie. We don't know. But we can't say that, he was perfect and he never did anything wrong to Maddie. But we also can't say that, he was a misogynist and he treated her like crap and kicked her to the curb and ran off. We just don't know what it is. So people try to use these things to come to hardline conclusions and then say, yeah, there's proof that Wyatt was a terrible person. We don't know for sure what the dynamic was between Wyatt and Maddie when they first met. We don't know if it was in Fort Scott. We don't know if it was in Peoria. We don't know if it was in Wichita. We don't know for sure. We think we know. We have some good indications, but we don't know absolutely when they first met. We don't know what the dynamic was when they first met. We don't know how they got started. Wyatt might have had no interest, but Maddie just kept inching her way in because she knew Virgil and wanted a good man to protect her. Wyatt might have totally courted her and promised her the world. We don't know, but we can't make conclusions just to satisfy our need to control the chaos in the history research. And so we also don't know the ending to it. We don't know, was Maddie out of control? Was Wyatt just wandering off and refusing to talk to her? Maybe it was just a natural drifting apart, as happened between frontiermen and frontier women. So we really don't know, but the last thing we should do is use today's lens of how we live today to assess how they were living then and determine things that we just don't have the evidence for. So yeah, long and short of that is, my pet peeve is I really get put off by people who want to make hardline character judgments of Wyatt Earp based on how they live today in a cozy world.
Yeah, that's a neat point. I didn't know that. Is it well documented that Maddie left before he came?
Yeah, and again, I refer to Gary Roberts a lot. I'm pretty certain, I'd have to look at my notes, but it was Gary Roberts who pointed that out, that there are letters for when she departed, because Kate was in Globe. Big Nose Kate, Doc's woman, was in Globe, and she invited Maddie out and said, why don't you come out and work with me? Which some have even speculated that might be why Wyatt left, because she went out to Globe and engaged in prostitution, which she had been out of for a while. Wyatt, and I'm not saying this happened, but we have to look at all angles. Wyatt might have been like, hey, I'm trying to get out of the law, work the prostitution work, and make some money, speculating on mines and whatnot. If you're going back to prostitution work, we're done. I'm just not going to entertain that. And he said, that's it, we're done. I'm going off, and then ended up meeting up with Sadie. And we don't know that that's what happened, but we don't know that he abandoned her either. It's pretty well documented. Kate sent a letter to Maddie. Maddie said, I'm going off to Globe. Wyatt heard from the family that Maddie left and went to Globe. And then Wyatt, now he didn't go after her, so that tells us something. At least we don't have any record of him going to Globe and go get her. And I kind of doubt that he did. But it sounds to me like a relationship that had just run its course. They weren't really fit for each other. It wasn't going to go anywhere. Maddie might have felt betrayed because she might have thought that she was, with the right guy. I mean, Wyatt was really earning a place in the Old West, the frontier as a lawn man and stuff. And so he was a catch for a woman like Maddie at that time. But, we don't know what he owed her. We don't know what they were obligated to each other. And we can't draw conclusions that don't have evidence to support.
And I think things that are coming to my mind is how movies have depicted what you said. Because like I said, I didn't know that it was fairly common to connect with the prostitute. But there's multiple movies that have depicted that. And I wonder if it's because they knew or if they just thought it would be cool. Like Lonesome Dove, the hot gal in that, the prostitute, she connected with the one dude who was the most badass. And she was open in Lonesome Dove. Obviously it's a fictional novel, but she was open that the reason she was with that guy was to get to California, to San Francisco. It wasn't because she loved him and wanted to stay with him forever. It wasn't because he was going to stay with her forever. It was, like you said, a mutual thing. And then Big Nose Kate was kind of that relationship with Doc in the movie. And by the way, those of you who don't know, Big Nose Kate wasn't nearly as hot in real life.
Yeah, she wasn't terribly ugly for the time. She was actually okay. There's a few different pictures of her, and so I don't know which ones people relate to her, because there's funeral pictures and only one is actually her. And there's some that are, but yeah, she definitely wasn't as good looking as Joanna Pacula in Tombstone, though.
Definitely a letdown when you're thinking Tombstone, Big Nose Kate.
Yeah. In real life, Louisa was quite attractive. Morgan's wife, her pictures, she's a good looking gal.
Well, Morgan always did have the pretty face or whatever the line was.
Yeah.
Ma always said he was the pretty handsome.
Yeah, that's right. If she always doted on the frowner.
Yeah.
Horizon, the movie Horizon, I love the interaction between Kevin Costner and the prostitute.
Yeah.
Because it's that movie's a great movie with a lot of accuracy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That really depicts well how it goes. She's not promising him in the movie that she's going to be the perfect wife forever. And he's not promising her that he's going to take care of her, love her forever, cherish her as a perfect husband. But they have an understanding that they're going to treat each other well while they each get where they need to get to in life. And that's really emblematic of how a lot of the relationships were at the time.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And then she just left one day and he was like, okay, she's gone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And now another thing that's interesting, I didn't expect to get this deep into the Wyatt Maddie thing, but it's suspected and probably very likely that Wyatt knew Kate before he knew Maddie or before he knew Doc, because he always called Kate Fisher, which was her name before she met Doc. So it indicates that Wyatt knew Kate from before Dodge City and all that. And the suspicion is that there's a place somewhere, I can't remember the name of the town, it's between Ellsworth and Wichita, about halfway in between on the road there, that Wyatt was most likely in just before coming to Wichita. And there's some speculation, it's not verifiable at this point, that Wyatt and Kate might have come to Wichita together. That James was the big prostitute runner in the family, and that's something that gets put on Wyatt a little bit unfairly. James was very big into the prostitution business. Wyatt would often bounce for him, look out for him, and was associated. He was definitely associated in that prostitution business because of his brother. But there's speculation that it's possible that Wyatt came to Wichita with Kate at the behest of James. Whether he summoned Wyatt and Kate came along, or whether he summoned Kate to come and work with his wife Bessie and said, bring Wyatt when you come, or maybe it was both, hey, Kate, Wyatt, why don't you guys come to Wichita? We got to get set up. But anyways, so Wyatt and Kate very likely knew each other back before Wyatt became a name and before he knew Doc. The interesting thing about that is that Wyatt and Kate never liked each other. So it also adds speculation to the idea that when Maddie was in, was it Riverside or San Bernardino, Colton maybe, I can't remember which town they're in. But anyways, when she was with the Earp family shortly after Tombstone, and Kate sent letters knowing her resentment of Wyatt, it's very likely she could have sent a letter saying, screw Wyatt, quit waiting for that guy, I don't like him, whatever, come out here and let's make a go of things and glow. We don't know that, but she didn't lose an opportunity to badmouth Wyatt. They didn't like each other, and so she could have fueled that. You could if you want to put the blame on Wyatt for the reason that people do, you could just as easily put the blame on Kate, saying that Maddie left Wyatt because of Kate. Again, we don't know that. I'm not suggesting that's absolutely what it is, but there's certainly a lot of angles that have to be considered before coming to a conclusion.
So Kate ended a 5-year relationship. Was she down about it? No, it wasn't hers.
Nice.
It's a meme I saw today. So you mentioned something when you were talking about Maddie taking off, that the letters. So I think it's interesting hearing about the things he's able to research. He's dug into, or wants to dig into, notes that other researchers have made. And now you're talking about letters. Do you mind saying what letters are out there?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of letters. Most of them are in historical societies. Arizona Historical Society has a lot.
And that's letters. Does that letter exist between Kate and Maddie?
I'm not positive on that. That's a good question. I don't know if it exists now, or if it was found, recorded, and then lost, or what. So that's a fair question. I don't know on that letter. Again, though, that is one that, unless I'm mistaken, that came from Gary Roberts, Dr. Roberts, and I pretty much take what he says as gold. Now, you never want to be too beholden to the appeal to authority fallacy and just say just because Gary Roberts said it, it's absolutely true. But you can take a lot of what he says to the bank. He is incredibly fair, incredibly honest, incredibly balanced, and incredibly well researched. He's been writing letters and articles for True West magazine, probably going back to the early '60s. He really knows his stuff. But anyway, so I'm about 99% sure that I read that from him, and some notes I have that talking about the letter from Kate to Maddie.
Wow.
Yeah, but yeah, I can't say if that letter's around or not. I can probably find out, but I can't say offhand. Yeah.
Huh.
But there's a lot of letters. Like Louisa was barely in Tombstone. Her and Morgan were in Montana, and they went down to California to the Earp family place there. And then Morgan went from California over to Tombstone. So he didn't arrive with Wyatt and Virgil like in the movie. Wyatt and Virgil arrived, and then Morgan came several months later. And Louisa stayed in Southern California, there in the San Bernardino area. And again, I think the family was stationed in Colton at the time, if I remember correct. But there's a bunch of letters from Louisa, and she described Magnolia Boulevard in Riverside. If you're from that area, you know Magnolia Boulevard, beautiful road. She described it, and it's neat because she described the road very similar to how it is now, divided down the middle, the trees hanging over, how beautiful it was. So it's really cool if you live in Riverside or in that area, you know that road. It's neat reading Morgan's wife's letter accounting it, when it was a new road and just beautiful. But yeah, there's a lot of letters from Louisa to her sister talking about things, talked about her stress, about her concern over Morgan and all these things, and yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff. We have a lot of letters between Wyatt Earp and Stuart Lake and Fred Dodge and John Clum and those kind of things too. So yeah.
Huh. Wow. Yeah, that's cool. Deep level of research.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It gets absorbing, but it's fun.
So I was thinking maybe you could run us through Wyatt Earp's sentiment, I guess as I call it, because so in the 1900s, early 1900s, there was this big throwback to hearing from the pioneers. And that's why we have a wealth of information of history books where pioneers would write down their stories. I talked about one on one of my live videos that I was reading, and it's a compilation of people throughout Washington State that wrote, unfortunately they were too short, but they wrote short stories about something from their pioneer life, because those kind of books were selling like hotcakes. And that's like where Charlie Siringo, he was broke, and he decided, well, I could write a book about my life, and so he wrote one. And so there was kind of like this renaissance. Now that America had been settled, now there was like this fervor to not lose the history, I guess. And a lot of those people were still alive, or the people who were kids at that time were alive and could write down books, like in the 19-teens. And so that's when my understanding, and here in a second he'll explain it all, that's my understanding is when Wyatt Earp really came onto the scene, was Hollywood was jumping on that bandwagon, and so they were finding real live heroes. I think Tom Mix was one, or was Tom Mix an actor?
He was an actor.
Okay, well the actors realized they could get more authenticity. I don't know enough about it, but that happened. And so my understanding is that's when the Wyatt Earp folklore really took off. However, that may not be so. I mean, I guess in Arizona he was well known. Do you want to run us through that from the time of, let's say, the OK Corral, or even before, the sentiment toward Wyatt Earp, how it has ebbed and flowed?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm probably just hitting bullet notes. It's easy for me to get into the weeds, and I'm going to try not to here. In a short version, after the OK Corral, Wyatt was hot and cold. Not that he was hot and cold, but the people were hot and cold. He could go into one town and they'd all high-five him and celebrate him because he was the celebrated Wyatt Earp of Tombstone. They'd go into another town the next day and they'd try to run him out of town because he was a terrible murderer of innocent cowboys. It was all over the place. One thing you'd say, generally his circles, he ran in good circles, respected men who regarded him highly. L.A., San Diego, San Francisco, he had well-to-do friends that were established businessmen who thought well of him. So he always was generally received well in his crowds, but there was always back and forth depending on where you went. He gave a few interviews, not much. He was really quite laconic. The most famous one was the Examiner in '96. I think it was '96. Of course, that was also the year of the big boxing match. So in '96, he refereed the fight between Sharkey and Fitzsimmons, and that was a big deal. Without getting into all that, there was a lot of controversy, and Wyatt just said, to heck with this, I am absolutely done with any kind of fame or notoriety. He wanted none of it. He didn't want much of it even before, because he was very reserved, and now after that, he just didn't want any of it. So Wyatt sort of disappeared, and he went on, having his whole life pretty much having saloons and helping out with law work until he retired out of LA around 1910, and then just ran his mines until 1929 when he died. But he didn't try to be known. He didn't try to straighten out his story. He didn't really care. He just didn't want to be known. He didn't want to be talked about. He didn't want to be in the limelight. He enjoyed, when he was in LA, so the last 20-ish years of his life, he spent either in LA in the summer or out at the Happy Days mine out on the Arizona-California border in the wintertime. When he was in LA, he had two things he loved to do: eat ice cream and visit the movie sets where they're making westerns. Wyatt Earp absolutely loved frontier life. That was his world. He loved it. He loved saloons. He was never a drunkard, but he loved saloons. He absolutely loved, he enjoyed gambling. He just loved that life and that world. And so when they started making these movies, he started visiting the sets. And, I don't know exactly the steps, but basically it's like, hey, here's Wyatt Earp. And some of the guys who were pretending to be cowboys were awestruck that here was Wyatt Earp. And so they became friends with them, Mix and Hart, being the primary two. And there's a lot of stories about, did he meet John Wayne? Was he consulting? Was he not consulting? Was he just visiting? And without getting into all that, because, it's a debate, but he was definitely on set absorbing these movies. So the reason why that's integral to what we're talking about here is that I think it was Tom Mix who said, hey, you got to sell your story. These stories around 1925 are starting to sell. And like Richard talked about, at that time, there was a renaissance. And imagine, it's kind of like the guys today who are 70 years old and love to bring out their old 57 Chevy and go to a car rally. It's kind of like that. These guys were old. They came from a time that was obviously gone, never going to come back, and love to get together and reminisce about their experiences and share their stories. And these were the old pioneer things. So they had pioneer get-togethers. They had magazines celebrating it, and that was a big thing at the time. So these stories were coming out, and Tom Mix was like, "Why you need to sell your story?" He was like, I don't really want to, but at the same time, he knew that he was running out of money. He didn't have a lot of money.
Tom Mix was like, quit asking me for ice cream money. Write your story and make some of your own money. Yeah,
that's right. I'm not buying any more ice cream cones. But generally, Wyatt wanted to make some money. He knew that he could sell his story because it was starting to happen. He had his first biographer, John Flood, writing it up. And apparently, somebody could say I got this wrong, and that's fine. But there had been some back and forth between Wyatt and Sadie that he didn't want to tell his story. Sadie wanted him to because it could be a lot of money. And whatever it was, eventually...
Wait, who's Sadie?
Josephine. Huh. Yeah, sorry, in case you don't know, Sadie, Josephine, because I think I've used both names.
Yeah.
Sadie was what Wyatt called his wife. Josephine Marcus is how she's known otherwise, but her nickname...
I had forgotten.
Yeah. But anyways, so...
Sadie wanted him to write his story.
Yeah, whatever the back and forth was, the bottom line is they did try to sell it. John Flood wrote a book that was really roughly written. I have it, and it's tough to read. But it's neat for the facts, or for the record. But it's it's tough to read.
Why?
Bad writing, just really bad writing.
Poor grammar.
Poor storytelling. Really poor storytelling. But anyway, so Tom Mix tried to help get it sold. And it was like, sorry, the story's interesting, but this just isn't readable. We got enough other stuff. And so then what happened next is, this is where I got to try not to get too into the weeds. Walter Noble Burns wrote the story The Lion of Ireland, which focused on Wyatt Earp and the Tombstone Troubles, and that made Wyatt popular. Stuart Lake came out on suggestion of Bat Masterson. Bat Masterson told Stuart Lake, the story of the West will never be told unless Wyatt Earp tells it, and Wyatt won't talk. So Stuart Lake took it upon himself to reach out to Wyatt and say, we need to tell your story. Unfortunately, it didn't happen sooner because they only got started, about a year, roughly a year before Wyatt died. Stuart Lake was very good about taking interviews with Wyatt and writing down a lot of notes, so they got that story out. So here's the nuts and bolts of it is, Walter Noble Burns put out a story that made Wyatt and Doc and everybody look really good, and it really blew up the whole Tombstone thing, made it popular. Stuart Lake came out with a book that really focused on the life of Wyatt Earp. Think of, if you will, the movie Tombstone and the movie Wyatt Earp with Kevin Costner. One focuses on Tombstone and was great. One focuses on Wyatt Earp and had a lot of really cool stuff to it. Kind of the same thing with the books. Iliad of the West, or whatever, Tombstone, Iliad of the West, The Lion of Tombstone, or whatever it's called, I can't even remember now. The Walter Noble Burns book, though, was a very glamorized story of Tombstone. The Stuart Lake book was a very glamorized story of Wyatt Earp's life. And at this point, boom, Wyatt Earp was huge. They made the movie Frontier Marshal, like right after that, starring Randolph Scott, and I think it was Cesar Romero, I think, played Doc Holliday in that one, who played like Joker later in Batman. Good movie, but anyways, I don't think they called him Wyatt Earp, but it's very much based on that. So anyways, at that point, right around the time of Wyatt Earp's death and just after, he was pretty well thought of. However, at the same time, Billy Breckenridge, who I think is, a human scumbag, he went and visited with Wyatt and Sadie and talked about the old days and played them as such good friends, and we have record of this. This isn't just me making this up. So Billy Breckenridge then published his own book, Eldorado, which is what the Tombstone reunion days or celebration days are named after, the Eldorado days, named after Billy Breckenridge's book. Well, Billy Breckenridge wrote letters saying, Wyatt, I'm your friend, we've been together for a long time, you can trust me, all this and that. And then he wrote this book about Wyatt Earp, just about what a terrible person he was, and just completely, it killed Wyatt. Wyatt was a very trusting individual, which is another reason, we won't get into that right now, why I don't think he was a big liar, because he was so trusting. When you're that naively trusting of people, as he was, it got him into trouble a lot of times. It's usually because you don't have it in you to do that to people. Not saying he was a saint, I'm not saying he didn't have his faults, but I don't think that was one of them. But anyways, so then sentiment turned against Wyatt. So for a while, he was the hero of the West. He was the guy. And then you had guys who were friends with the Outlaws who didn't like it, and they were basically debunking Wyatt. They've come to be known as the anti-Earpers that were prevalent for a while and tore down a lot of Wyatt Earp's story. So then that was going on. You had Frank Waters. Well, okay, so let me say, then the next big chapter in that story was the TV show, The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp, which... I have that series, but even as a Wyatt Earp fan, it can be tough to watch sometime. And let me put it this way. I can understand why if you grew up on that show, you grew up kind of mad at Wyatt Earp. It's not Wyatt Earp's fault. He didn't make the show. But that show, Wyatt Earp pretty much never walks on the ground when he's there. He just floats on wings everywhere he goes. It's absurdly, overly positive about Wyatt Earp, and can be tough to watch at times. But the world at the time didn't know it. Obviously this is in the 50s. There's no internet, and there's barely even, much recorded on this unless you're a historian. So people ate it up. And Wyatt Earp now was not only the baddest dude of the West, he was also the most saintly guy who ever crossed the prairie. And so then you had the pendulum swing go the other way. And that's where you had Frank Waters, who said, what a bunch of tripe. I know this isn't all true, which is fine because it was overblown and we needed a more accurate account. But he did interviews with Allie before she died. And then one thing that's notable about his book is that he didn't publish it until after she died, because she threatened that if he published it, she would, sue him, and kind of insinuated so many words she'd have him roughed up or something. But she was not happy about his manuscript when she read it. So he had to wait until after Allie, Virgil's wife, died before he could even publish the book. So that tells you something about how misconstrued a lot of the information was. It was an absolute hit piece on Wyatt Earp. So rather than giving us a nice balanced version to counter Stuart Lake's. His was probably even worse to the other direction. So where Stuart Lake was way out of bounds over here on how positive Wyatt Earp was, Frank Waters was like even farther of a swing the opposite direction, trying to balance it. So now coming into the 60s, you have what kind of became known as the revisionist Western period in movies, but also in books, because it was also part of the hippie era, and so everybody was anti-establishment. And if you've ever seen the movie Doc, starring Stacy Keach and Harrison, what's his name? I can't remember the name. Anyways, the guy who played the judge in Ghostbusters, who also Wyatt Earp in the movie. But that movie was purely an anti-war Vietnam movie, using Wyatt Earp and Doc as the main characters to tell that story. And that's what happened during that era. Wyatt's reputation, his persona became tied in a lot to what was going on in society, in the zeitgeist, and the anti-establishment, what's the word I'm looking for? Anti-macho man, whatever, type of thing. And so, so Wyatt suffered a bit from that. And all this while, it's always been a swing. And you have to go back to the 20s, the teens, where Wyatt Earp just wanted a fair shake. And he made the mistake of embellishing a little bit to say, well, that story's not going to sell, which he was naive, because he didn't realize people would love a story as is. The most fascinating story of the Old West is Wyatt Earp's stripped down, true to life story. It's fascinating. The embellished stuff is to me not as interesting. But you take it from there, and all he wanted was a straight shot, and it's just one swing after another. Here, then here. All this stuff. And being praised and being vilified, and it was never really fair until you come to the 90s, and you have the movie Tombstone, and then you have the movie Wyatt Earp, which I think are both. Neither one is perfect, but they're both, I think, really well done, especially given the time. We've got a lot more information since those movies were made, so you can't criticize them for not having the information that we have now. But they both do a good job of showing Wyatt Earp as generally a guy who wanted to do the right thing, but he had some faults, he had some weaknesses, and he made some mistakes, but in the end, he generally stood for what's right. And one thing, I don't care what you want to say, this is one thing, I just, I don't think you can really argue this if you look at the record. Earp and his guys did drive the Cowboys out of California, and they changed things down there, and it had to be done. It was like Elliot Ness and Al Capone or whatever. That's probably not the best comparison because it's
California.
It's the IRS that took him down. Arizona, did I say California?
Yeah.
Sorry, Arizona. He drove the Cowboys out of Arizona. I mean, the impact that they had in breaking up that activity was huge. Not that it didn't happen. I'm not saying there was never any wrestling, never any Cowboys, but I mean, he really broke their hold, and that's huge. And even there, you can say, well, he only did it for the reward money. I don't think he did it just for that. He had a strong sense of what was right, and that's another discussion. But I think that story is more interesting. I think the Tombstone shows that pretty well. I think that Wyatt Earp shows his story pretty well. And so since those movies, we now have basically just people taking the movies, generally speaking here. The movies get people interested. That's the catalyst. Then they find information, depending on what they find and what tickles their ears. They're like, oh, look at all these accounts of how Wyatt Earp was a terrible guy. If you read the Cowboy accounts, he was just rotten, and then you have people who say, well, yeah, but look at how, like what I just said, look at how he got rid of the criminal activity or how he stopped it, and and it had such a strong hand in it and all that. And now we're just in a phase where it's kind of 50-50, I mean, I think that generally, I think it's a little better than 50-50 for Wyatt Earp being well regarded, but roughly speaking, we're in a 50-50 era where it's just take your side and bring up have your facts ready and make your case. But I think that's kind of where we're at with them now. It's been a weird history for Wyatt Earp.
But unfortunately, most of the time, the case that's presented is pretty weak.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that, and this is tough, and it might sound a little arrogant saying this, and not everyone's like this. Like I said, Dr. Roberts is a great example. Lee Silva, amazing researcher, great example. And there's a lot of good ones out there. A lot of good researchers. Tiefer Tiller is good. DeHaas. David DeHaas is a real good buddy of mine. He's a great researcher on herbs. Has a lot of information. 2 books. He's got more coming. But they're good, balanced researchers. There's a lot of ego that goes into it. I don't think people realize. And it's kind of like the Facebook thing. When you when you learn an interesting fact, you want to get out there and tell it to everybody because it gratifies the ego that you know something. And people can easily get caught up in that. I don't want to be mean about that, but it's easy to get caught up in that and then start getting dogmatic about something that made you feel good about yourself because you think you had something. And we got to hold loose to these things. Even my opinions, on Earp could be upturned tomorrow if we have new evidence, and you got to be loose in order to process everything fairly going forward.
Yeah, learn to enjoy the digging rather than the knowing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, guys, we've just barely touched on things, but I wanted to introduce you to my brother. And if you like this and there's a good response, we can do a live video.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun, where you can ask any questions. Like, we didn't even touch on Ringo, if he killed himself or not.
Yeah.
That's a big discussion. I know, I guarantee you, just in saying that, some people right now are like, oh, let me tell you, I can tell you. There's a lot to be considered on multiple angles on that. Same with, I had another one. There's a lot of angles on that you haven't heard. I guarantee it. I would bet money. So that's one topic. There's so many topics on this that we could be discussing. We got to go to Tombstone again more recently, and it's fun just walking around and just letting them go. That's why it'd also be a lot of fun to go to Tombstone sometime and do a tour there or something.
Oh, yeah. Shoot, yeah, we should get a bunch of people who all want to meet there at the same time.
Yeah.
Go tour around, talk about all the spots. It'd be a lot of fun.
That'd be amazing. It's when I'm in Tombstone by myself, I'm like, dang, I wish my brother was here, because I don't want to Google constantly and have to. Well, even when I do Google, I'm sending him messages. Same with when I drove through New Mexico, sending him messages constantly. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully.
I do want to say something, just to be fair. The historian down there, I cannot remember his name.
In Tombstone?
Yeah, Ben Trawick was for a long time, and Ben's a really nice guy. But the new guy, I'm sorry for not remembering his name, but I believe it's him who does tours, and he does do tours out, so I don't want to steal any thunder. You can do tours down there. I haven't been on that tour. I know a couple of people taken it and had a good time. So I don't want to sell him short, because I've heard good stuff about him. He's written some good books. I haven't met him yet, but yeah, I love doing tours and talk. Every time I'm down there, I end up talking to people. Hear me talking and start coming over asking me questions, and I start giving the details of stuff. So it always happens when I'm down there, anyways. But yeah, it's a fun thing to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. That would be a lot of fun. Well, hopefully you and hopefully we can make it down to New Mexico, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
So, guys, like I say, hope you enjoyed this. Hope he gets this edited really fast. He actually likes editing. I don't.
I'm a nerd.
Yeah, he is. So, all right, folks, we're going to sign off now. So we'll see you soon. Remember,
all right, thanks for watching.
Life's a lot more fun over on the wild side. All right.
Cool. All right, I'll try and edit this evening. It should be an easy